Welcome to Shitcoin TV, home of the spiciest memes in crypto, and also some very informative content that we love to get out to you guys. We're all about the facts here at shitcoin.com. Today, we're joined by a very good friend of Andreas beside me, Lawson Baker. Lawson, we'd love to get a little intro of who you are and why you're with us today.
Hey, Lawson Baker, under the Twitter handle LWSN Baker, B-A-K-E-R. I am head of special projects at Tokensoft, and in addition to being general counsel there. And I'm working on essentially what is kind of the future of security tokens. And then also I have a project called Relay Zero, which I can't really talk about just yet, but we'll have some announcements coming out pretty soon on that. Slight disclaimer, all of these opinions are mine, not Tokensoft's or anybody else's. This is not legal advice, financial advice, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so that's kind of intro on me. Andreas and I have known each other for, I guess, like 2015 or 16.
Yeah,
back when
I used to live in the same house as you.
Yeah, back when you were living in the Synapse Pay House, now Synapse FI, which they don't have a house anymore, but we were all living in.
Yeah. Most people don't know this, but Synapse does the USD wires, both domestic US and international, for like most Bitcoin exchanges in the US.
Yeah, so that's kind of that background of how I came into the space. I went to law school to get into investment banking. I was originating fixed income bonds and lease products for about 4 or 5 years. Decided like I was working for like paychecks and bonuses, wanted to work at a startup for equity. Joined Synapse Pay, which first product market fit was a ACH, KYC, and AML API. And so in 2014 and 15, APIs were new, and so people wanted that. In addition to, there were no banking APIs. And so just like all other payment startups, you start at the fringes. PayPal started with porn. Synapse started with cryptocurrency exchanges. Synapse grew from that into predominantly their customers are traditional fintechs and even some banks and stuff like that. But kind of from the very beginning, Synapse kind of had like one foot in fintech and then another foot in like the backside of like crypto exchanges, which is where the fun kind of happens. And so that's how I knew Andreas. He was with Kraken at the time. And so we gave him a bed to sleep in.
Yeah, it was a pretty, I mean, it was a huge house. It was a pretty okay bed. But like,
yeah, the bed was actually horrible. And like, I think the lights weren't working, but it's a sweet house.
Yeah, but aside from you, like, they were very unclean people.
Yeah. You know, I was like part general counsel and business development, part like house cleaner.
Yeah, I totally remember that.
That was cool. So, you know, did that for about 1.5 years, and then finally moved out. Thank God, Andreas was willing to be a roommate with me, so we got a place in the Mission. So instead of the shit being in the house, the shit was on the streets.
Yeah, I've heard all about this. It sounded like a pretty interesting spot to be living in, right?
Yeah, you know, we liked our house. It was close to good coffee and all the good food. But you know, San Francisco is a high sensory experience, kind of like Thailand.
Yeah, I need to charge my headphones.
All right, good. I'm gonna crack my wine while he's out charging his phone.
Nice.
But yeah, so ended up being at Synapse for about 4 or 5 years, or 3 or 4 years, I guess, and then left there to kind of work on my own project, which was Relay Zero. And then ended up joining Tokensoft as head of special projects and just working on all sorts of kind of fun projects, and love to chat stablecoins.
Amazing.
I'm probably their best skeptic / also like I think there's like good use cases. So happy to chat about it. You know, from my perspective, like a lot of stable coins, like in their different flavors, all have like flaws, but like you can always mitigate against those. And so, yeah, so I come off as a skeptic online, but like there are obviously use cases for cryptocurrencies and stable coins. And personally, I think they're different experiments, right? And so like stable coins generally is just like programmable money, but like just take your normal money and make it kind of programmable. And then, so like looking at like the profile of that, you have three types of quote stablecoins. One is like an asset-backed one, like actually backed by like a government-issued currency, so dollars,
Right.
whatever. In any national currency could be a stable coin backed by the fiat. And then you have the on-chain asset-backed, the Maker DAOs and the DAIs of the world. And then you have like the hybrids in between, and then like just the full-on like completely algorithmic type of stuff, a little bit what Basis was trying to do, but essentially said that they can't do, and what I think Reserve is still trying to do, and different groups like that. And so you kind of have three different profiles of like stable coins, and the USD-backed ones are the ones that are being championed the most back right now, where the fiat-backed ones. And essentially how those are set up are you have DevCo that issues mints token, and then you have TrustCo BankCo that holds funds. In the Tether model, they're actually just generally held funds, FBO, underneath Tether. But in the USDT, in the
USDC?
the Circle USDC, in sorry, not in the USDT, in the Trust Token True USD model, in the Circle USDC model, in those type of models, and I think even the Paxos model, basically you have TrustCo and DevCo as two separate entities. One manages the token minting and that kind of process. One manages actually holding the funds. But the idea being like, if these two are separate, like each of those could like tell each other like you're wrong, you're right, and like remove incentives from like DevCo creating tokens that don't actually have money associated with it.
But,
and so go ahead.
So why don't just the banks make their own stable coins like right now?
They can and they will. And so like I've actually had conversations with banks that are talking about doing this. They're going to be the laggard that will do that. Currently, like they want to see how regulators look at these things. Here's my predominant issue with fiat-backed stablecoins. Basically, you have funds in a bank and tokens that represent it. So just let's call it 100 million in the bank and 100 million in tokens that are created. What they essentially the process is like when you send them money, they'll give you some tokens. And so once you do that, like, okay, cool, I have 100 TrueUSD or whatever. That's cool. That meets the bank's requirements. I have KYC'd, passed the identity checks and the anti-money laundering checks that the bank is required to accept my funds. The problem lies is like when I send it to Andreas, who has never worked with the bank, has never given them their KYC and their banking and the anti-money laundering information, and the bank now doesn't know who my funds are. And so what essentially is kind of the narrative that I see happening, especially kind of how I learned, banks look at groups like Synapse and fintechs generally. Essentially how it'll go is this. Regulator shows up for first audit or audit once like this program gets large enough. So let's say it's now $100 million. When the bank's going through their audit with the FDIC or the Federal Reserve or their state regulator, whoever their regulator is, they're going to say, cool, it looks like you're like, this program is really working really well. Like, how do you know, like, what's going on here? How do you know what's going on? And essentially they're going to say like, hey, I KYC and AML everybody when they deposit funds and also when they withdraw funds. And the regulator is going to be like, okay, cool, that makes sense. And so like, who has the funds now? And what's essentially going to happen is, a large percentage, 30%, 40%, whatever, are going to be in these unknown addresses. And they're going to be
just like held by ISIS, basically.
Yeah, I mean, like it could all be in valid spots, and everybody could pass. But from a regular standpoint, they're going to be like, okay, cool. You should probably know by next audit who these people are. And so two things are going to happen. Like they'll start performing chain analysis and things like that, and try to figure out good addresses, bad addresses. They're gonna have to try to figure out who all these people are. So they're going to either have to implement some sort of KYC or whatever. And what's essentially going to happen come audit number 2 is like a certain portion of these funds are going to be sitting somewhere that they don't the bank can't work with. It could just be something as simple like as a gambling website that like is not allowed in the US, to something like, way less, palatable to
or
banks.
just an exchange, an exchange outside of the US that doesn't even accept US customers because of.
Yeah, like essentially what fiat-backed stablecoins is like an outsourced banking relationship for exchanges that aren't so good with the compliance or don't care about it. And so like, it's like, if you were to like look at well, they got bought by Circle. So like, they're kind of like cleaning that whole deal up. But, if you look at like the operation expenditures and like where all the things that break and the fraud exists, it all exists at the connection with the bank. And that's kind of what, I learned at my days at Synapse. And so there's this huge team and a compliance requirement at this level alone. Frankly, I would love to run an exchange and not have to deal with banking relationships and like outsource it all to TrueUSD or whoever. And like, maybe that is a good model, but like, I question whether it has like sustaining power because of the nature of like not knowing who all these addresses and accounts are.
In terms of so right now, just to give a bit more of like an overview of like the landscape. So I know there's obviously, you got USDT, TrueUSD, USDC. How many stablecoins roughly are there in circulation right
now? Fiat-backed ones, like dollar-backed ones. There's probably approaching 10, like just US dollar-backed ones.
Right.
I believe there are some Euro ones. There may be some in Asia. As I mentioned, like basically almost every exchange I talk to, if they have like, especially in Europe, because you can get fintech licenses and things like that. A lot of stable coins will be created at exchange level, in addition to people trying to replicate the true USDs around the world. And like true USD will grow into other currencies. Depending on what type of ones, like if I were to even break up like the fiat-backed ones, I believe there are additional issues within the fiat-backed ones. For example, a fiat-backed one where you have DevCo and TrustCo completely separate, like those two can like agree or disagree with each other, and like you get an attestation on the bank account, and then the blockchain kind of says how many tokens there are. There are issues in like syncing of that and the 30-day lag, and just how like banks set up, and there's risks that are present there. But then when you look at like exchange-based stablecoins, the way I look at that, especially if like there's not a separate TrustCo, you're basically carrying around the counterparty risk of the exchange, and you kind of spread it like a disease. Yeah. And so like if funds are held in FBO for benefit of exchange co, the whole counterparty risk of the exchange is now spread throughout the entire industry, because everywhere else that version of the stablecoin goes, you're basically spreading the counterparty risk to this exchange.
So when they get hacked for all the BTC, and you're sitting on their stablecoin, then you're gonna have to redeem it by depositing to them, but their website is down and they have no money.
Yeah, or Tether supposedly had it hacked. There's frozen funds in the Omni version of Tether. They also have
that was kind of undone because it's centralized.
Yeah, well, I mean, like all of the so like let's just back up on stable coins. All of these are centralized. So I tweeted a while back that stable coins are not cryptocurrencies. They are definitely programmatic money, but they are not cryptocurrencies. On Ethereum, these are set up with contract owners and or contract managers. Sometimes the owner is generally the DevCo issuer. A manager could be like this other third party that helps audit and things like that. And what you're managing there is whitelists, minting and burning. And so these things will be frozen. They'll be taken back. I mean, whenever they go through these audits, they end up having to start saying like, I can't work with this address, or this user is now bad. That money is not really money anymore. That's kind of the process that will go down, because they don't uphold the censorship resistant version of money. I also have kind of a wild thought that this is banking regulation issues, but there's a regulation called Regulation E, which essentially is a requirement for banks, and even in some cases fintechs, to have consumer protections. And basically, like, if I didn't authorize something, I can call a bank and be like, hey, give my money back. within a certain time frame, 60 days with Regulation E. I believe those type of things will probably end up being implemented or already applicable to trust goes. And so then, like, is there actually finality if I send this money to you? Like, no. So, like, the fiat-backed ones, in my opinion, don't smell like other cryptocurrencies in it that they have a degree of finality. They have this censorship-resistant narrative, like no control, deal or whatever. But still interesting. I think they could have, interesting use cases specifically. So I tweeted this a while back. There's probably a counter argument that if regulators say, like, I'm probably okay with this because I think this is where the space is going, and like Fed Reserve, I still want to stay relevant. If that's the case, they have two options: just issue it directly from the Fed Reserve, or let every bank issue their own stablecoin. And so, like, that's kind of like a mashup of like what you see with like HSBC and like Hong Kong.
I was about to say, this sounds very familiar.
Yeah, you were the one who actually referenced this for me initially.
Yeah.
But yeah, so banks in some countries can actually issue the national currency. There's a process.
Including in the US a while back.
Yeah, exactly. And so you could see it trending towards back something like that, but that definitely would take like a policy shift. Mm-hmm. And so if that is the case, and there is a policy shift, and you could definitely see stable coins, fiat-backed stable coins, being an alternative to interacting with a bank. And so, as I mentioned earlier, Synapse was a banking API. And so you could probably argue that if these policy does shift, that stablecoins could be and probably would be a more competitive version of a banking API. Banking APIs, if you look at any of them, there's not really any comprehensive ones, but Synapse is probably the most comprehensive in the US. There's a huge lift, like bring on user, verify their identity, like do all these different type of processes. And frankly, like all of these processes are because of like stuff on the back end and bank, and get API keys, managing OAuth, and managing all of these type of things. If you can deliver something to a self-custodial wallet and the user is controlling the keys, like you don't have to worry about all that stuff. Like that's just how like the system is architected. And so you could probably argue that that type of stablecoin could be successful if there was a monetary shift over the alternative, something like a banking API.